Can you hear me? Yep, good to go. All right, okay. Well, good morning, everyone. It's really fantastic to have you all online from across the region. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Douglas Gauthier, and I'm the CEO and Artistic Director of the Adelaide Festival Centre, and it's been my privilege to chair AAPPAC since 2013. You know, these online sessions, I think, are critically important in keeping our network together and in touch. And to my knowledge, we are still the most comprehensive and long-standing cultural professional association in our region. And, you know, I think even through these difficult times, we've kept together as best we could. And we've thought about how we deal with the current circumstances, shared our experiences, and think about how we can come out of it, but and the part that we can play in it. And I don't think there's ever been a more important time for the creative industries and the contribution, the positive contribution they can make to our respective communities, but also to our Asia Pacific community as a whole. So it's an important thing that we're doing. The key focus today is technology, and I think all of us have been thinking about that very strongly, how it could better serve our industry. And there is no question that this crisis has forced us into perhaps bringing on some of that thinking and some of those innovations, and having to deal with some of those questions much earlier than we would have normally. And again, I think there's no question that a lot of these things that we're looking at, a lot of these technologies we're looking at, will continue to play a very important part for us as an industry, but importantly for our audiences. So I'd like to thank again the Secretariat, Rochelle and Jack, for organising the sessions and many other digital events that we can look forward to later in the year. I'm very pleased to welcome our session panellists today, Catherine Connor, Executive Director of PAC Australia, Ms. Lin Tin Chung, the Programming Director of the National Theatre and Concert Hall in Taipei, Ms. Charlotte Noors, the Managing Director of Singapore Repertory Theatre, and the session will be moderated by our old friend, Mr. Chung Hak Peng from the Singapore Symphony Group. So I'd like to thank them very much for their time and effort and contribution in this. So I hope you'll enjoy the session. And now it's my pleasure to hand back to the Secretariat to first of all share with us the presentation of the AAPPAC survey results. So thank you, and over to the Secretariat.
Thank you, Chairman. Hi, everyone. I hope you're all well and safe. My name is Rochelle, and I'm the Secretary General of AAPPAC. A warm welcome to AAPPAC members and friends, and hello to those joining us for the first time today. Next, please. In July last year, we did a survey on COVID-19 to gather an overview of operational impact and responses amongst our members. Almost 1 year on, we carried on a second survey to get a sense of the sector's recovery from the pandemic. We are no doubt in a better place now, though as many of you know, the situation is still fluid. Many of you will attest to being agile and resilient as we open, close, and reopen our centers, renegotiate contracts, and make adjustments, countless adjustments to seating capacities and access in response to health advisories. Next slide, please. Last year, 2/3 of us were closed, but this year, 2/3 of us have reopened. The duration of closure has also been reduced from 3 to 5 months last year to 1 to 3 months this year. Centers in India and Philippines, unfortunately, remain closed. Japan and Taiwan have recently closed their venues again. In Singapore, we have resumed live performances for about 6 months now, but face the threat of further restrictions and closure due to a recent spike in community transmissions. Next, please. With venues being reopened, 42% have all staff working in the office and 37 have adopted a more flexible and restrictive working arrangement to minimize risk and exposure. Next, please. Live performances have resumed to about 75 to 100% of venue capacities in New Zealand, Australia, and China, as well as Taiwan before the recent closure. Centers in South Korea and Japan before the recent closure as well were operating at about 50% of capacities. On the lower end of the spectrum are centers in Malaysia and Singapore. Interestingly, one center noted that they can do about 100% with audiences being masked and 75% with no mask. Next, please. Most centers adopt similar front of house measures, such as contact tracing, temperature screening, wearing of masks, and safe distancing. Pre-event testing is less commonly adopted and mostly when capacities exceed a stipulated number. Next, please. Sanitization between rehearsals and changeovers, no sharing of equipment and instruments, and restricted capacities in back of house facilities are commonly imposed measures. Some require all performers to be masked on stage. Unmasked performance must produce negative test results valid within 72 hours. Next, please. 60% have reported high demand for live performances, with ticket sales at over 75% of saleable capacity. About 30% reported about average demand at about 50 to less than 75%. Next, please. For presentation of international artists in Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, Japan, Singapore, and South Korea, about 14 to 21 days of quarantine needs to be served. Visas are granted only to specific countries, and artists are subject to testing and restricted itineraries within the country. Next, please. Seoul and Dongyong in South Korea have fully opened borders. Most allow travel from specific countries only. Borders are entirely closed in KL, Malaysia. When asked when all borders will completely reopen, most do not think that it is possible this year. About 29% indicated that it is most likely to be the first quarter of next year, with 33% indicating that it's most likely to be mid of next year. Next, please. Several of our operational responses have now become standard in our policies and practices. Some centers are looking at more permanent hardware changes to relook at airflow and circulation within venues, as well as to enable more digitalization and provide broadcasting support to artists. And of course, digital has become the new buzzword. It is sometimes the silver bullet, an end in itself rather than a means to an end. There are also different aspects and applications, from enabling business transformation to art making, to presentations, to marketing and distribution. Next, please. And this is what we want to uncover this year in our Digital Unpacked series of conversations, so please stay tuned for more. These are some of the more interesting models our art centers have experimented with. I'm sure they'll be happy to share more with you, some of which will also be touched on today. We are happy to have Hak Ping, the CEO of Singapore Symphony Group, to help us kick off this year's series and moderate the session. Thank you, and over to you now, Hak Ping.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning, afternoon, or evening to everyone, especially our international participants in this session, and welcome to the first session of Digital Unpacked. After the set of results just revealed by Rochelle, I think it seems to be quite clear that we are in for a long ride. And we're in for a ride where our audiences could be allowed in or not, up and down over the course of the next 12 to 24, maybe 36 months. So it's quite timely then we're gathered today in this webinar to talk about the past, present, and future of digital in our industry with three members who are really at the forefront of digital developments, especially in the past year. They will be sharing with us their experiences, their learning lessons, and helping us to unpack what digital will mean for us and our audiences as we move forward. So in short, you are in for a treat, and it's a great way to spend an hour of your time this morning, because our panelists will be our crystal ball into the future. And so to lay out what we're going to be doing for the next 45 minutes or so, we will be hearing from the three panelists in succession, and then we'll be opening the floor for questions. And we really encourage us to have a conversation with everyone. So we would like it and love it if you could unmute your mic and just ask the questions as you as we enter the Q&A section in the later half of this morning. If you feel that you have questions coming up while our presenters are presenting, do feel free to use the chat function, and then we'll take note of these and we'll pick them up when we enter into the open discussion later on. So without further ado, let us welcome our very first speaker, who is Catherine Connor. She is Executive Director of Performing Arts Connections Australia, and this is an association of 200 over members, including arts centers, independent producers and producing companies, festivals and performing arts consultants, agencies and funding bodies. So anyone and everyone who is involved in the presentation of the arts in Australia is a member of this association. And Catherine comes to us with a very rich background as both a performing arts presenter, also a producer and an arts planning consultant in Australia for 20 years. So we're really looking forward. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And it really is a pleasure to be joining you all today. As I was formulating some thoughts for this session, I realized I could probably talk about this for hours on end, but I only have 15 minutes. So I will, I'd like to actually start, as is custom in Australia, with an acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the land upon which I live and work, which is the Whadjuk Budja of the Noongar Nation, which is commonly known as Perth in Western Australia. So we thought I might be a good speaker from the panel to kick this off, as my organisation, AAPPAC Australia, represents performing arts centres across Australia and New Zealand. So we have some comparable insights into the impact of COVID-19 on our membership and our creative community here. So I haven't prepared any slides, but I just thought I would talk, and I'm very happy to go into anything in greater detail later. But I do have a few numbers that contextualise the recent and the ongoing experiences of performing arts centres and touring in particular in Australia. We have approximately 170 performing arts centres here. In March last year, as the entire nation went into lockdown, of course, all these centres closed and cancelled their activity until further notice. And we started mapping the impact on our performing arts centres straight away. When I talk about these statistics, I'm not actually including the major capital art centres such as the Adelaide Festival Centre or the Sydney Opera House or Arts Centre Melbourne, but we include all the metropolitan and regional centres. So across Australian performing arts centres, there were nearly 26,000 performances that were cancelled immediately. Only 6,000 of these performances were able to be scheduled into this year. So this meant on average, these organisations lost about 85% of their annual income. And of course, as I'm sure is the experience of everyone, still paying significant overheads while they were shut and not earning any revenue. So most of these performing arts centres are owned by local government authorities and don't have access to any other types of government funding. So COVID was not an exception for them, and the outlook was pretty grim. We have been very fortunate in Australia that many larger organisations of cultural significance have been eligible for emergency COVID funding, and that many producers and artists have also received funding to continue to employ arts workers and make work. But it's actually posing quite a problem for our touring ecology here in Australia, because presenters obviously need to be sustainable and have healthy programming budgets in order to make the whole touring ecology work. And many will still be working with reduced programming budgets for another couple of years at least. So while there's ample supply of touring productions, the demand has actually dropped considerably. But there are always two sides to the coin. Assuming we can get international borders open in and out of Australia in 12 months or so, there's an ample supply of extraordinary Australian work that will be ready and available for international touring. So I would encourage you all to have a look at our Australian Performing Arts Exchange, which is happening in September, which will be available online, speaking of digital. So you can have a look at the amazing work from Australian artists and producers that they've been able to create over the last 12 months. And look, I do have to say that we are extraordinarily fortunate in Australia to have contained the virus to the extent that we have. We have very hard border controls. We have immediate lockdown responses that meant that new daily cases of coronavirus are currently in the single digits. And these are cases of Australians returning from overseas who immediately enter in hotel quarantine. So aside from some pretty strict contact tracing measures, a lot of social distancing, hand sanitizing and fluctuating capacity limits, COVID is currently not forming such a large part of the daily lives of Australians anymore. It is absolutely still a thing, but most of our venues around the country, we're very fortunate, are operating at 100% capacity. It's taken us a long time to get there. And I should point out, we're always on a knife's edge, that it takes very little for that 100% capacity to change. And that's also been reflected in ticket sales. So people are buying their tickets to shows later than usual. And there's a lot of fatigue around buying a show and then having it cancelled or having to negotiate a transfer to a different performance. But because our COVID numbers are so low, and of course we want to keep it that way, it only takes one case to be detected in the community for there to be a really strong response from the government. In recent times, there's been lockdown in various states with very little notice because a single case has been detected in the community. So a few weeks ago, one case is all it took to shut down the state where I live for 5 days. So the greatest ongoing concerns in Australia are small outbreaks that shut us down very quickly, and of course also have the potential to disrupt our success in suppressing the virus, and vaccinations. So we've had quite a slow rollout, and it is affecting and influencing confidence in travel and confidence in attending events and any kind of social gathering. But here we did spend a lot of time last year rethinking the structures and the models in which performing arts operate in Australia. And again, I could spend an hour more talking just about Australian Performing Arts Centres and COVID, but it does bring me to talk about what we're here to talk about today, which is our recent digital past and our exciting digital future. So I'm going to talk about a couple of incredible examples of the digital response to COVID here in Australia, and those that are continuing to charge forward beyond COVID. But it's also worth acknowledging that when we're talking about digital performance in Australia, we need to recognise that internet access in Australia is not always great. We're a very vast country, and many of our regional towns and communities simply don't have access to sufficient internet that would allow them to either consume the performing arts as audiences, let alone create work in their communities for them to broadcast. So while we know that digital is absolutely here to stay, it is important to recognise that in Australia it's not always an alternative or an option for many of our consumers. So I'd like to start the digital conversation in the Australian context by talking about access, which is access for artists and access for audiences. And when I talk about accessibility, I'm talking about physical access from a disability point of view, physical access in terms of geography and location, access to the opportunity to attend live performance from a financial point of view, or even from a cultural point of view. I spoke at a session not that long ago, which was called Issues of Inclusivity, but actually we realised that the issue was about exclusivity, and that is, who are we excluding by virtue of our traditional methods of delivering live performance? So I think about this a lot in terms of providing digital performance. Live streaming shows during COVID meant that we were able to remain connected to our audience, but it also meant that what we do became much more accessible to many, many more people. There's an arts organisation in Australia who deals specifically with access issues for the arts. And she had said something to me that has really stuck with me deeply. And that is, if we don't continue to offer digital in a post-COVID world, that it's actually akin to providing a ramp for a wheelchair user and then taking that ramp away. It's a big statement, but it is a statement that I think about a lot. So live performance in digital form also has proven incredibly valuable for Australian companies and audiences from an audience development point of view. It's been a low risk entry point for people who may not necessarily be inclined to attend theatres to see what they're about. So to sample performance, live performance, if you like, and these people are actually converting to in-person attendees. There were some findings from an audience research project in Australia that says that we're seeing 66% of the audiences who participated in an online experience during the pandemic would like to continue to engage in online performance. But on balance, only 10% say that it's actually their preferred method of engaging with work. So there might be a number of ways to cut through those numbers, but I think it's probably okay to say we're not compromising the live experience by providing digital. We're actually augmenting the offering. Some audience responses from the Melbourne Digital Concert Hall, which I'll talk about more in a minute, said that their online performance experience was the only way that they are now able to engage with live performance, and that they absolutely want to continue to engage in that way. So with or without the risk of COVID, we're seeing just how many arts goers are actually no longer confident attending a live theatre space because of their age or another chronic illness or any other contributing factor. And we also learn and continue to learn a lot from the digital experience. And one of the, I'll only just talk about this really briefly, but another big takeaway for us has been not to engage in live streaming of performances because that's what you think you should do. So not just digital for digital's sake. And by this, I mean that we had some examples of art forms that didn't translate well into the live stream experience, particularly if they didn't have a live audience in front of them. So we continue to learn and develop the art form to suit the new live stream format. But until you've really thought through what your work will look like and what sort of technology you need to support it, how it translates to the digital platform, it's actually really risky to simply put existing work in front of a camera and switch the live stream on. I do have to say, however, that providing live streamed performances by performing arts centres in Australia has really been limited to organisations who had the capacity to move quickly from a technical and from a marketing perspective. And these really are those larger state-funded organisations or those who have other sources of income and staff. So one of the things we're working on now are new models for these less well-resourced organisations to provide digital content. And there's variations on those models. There's an organisation called Regional Arts Victoria who are working on a digital model that includes pre-recording performances, that it might be a show that's set to go out on a tour, but if for whatever reason the touring company can no longer present the show live, the venue can use the pre-recorded performance at short notice. Or if audiences can no longer get to the theatre, and it could be because of a lockdown or anything that will actually prevent the audience from getting into the theatre, this type of model is really designed to be a COVID contingency rather than something that they will just consistently provide as an option. There's also several venues who have created new spaces specifically just to stream small-scale digital content, which is specific to their local community of artists. And it's for anyone who wants to tune in locally, so their existing audience base, or from anywhere around the globe. There are venues who are installing new infrastructure that will allow them to live stream a performance to audiences as it is happening with the live audience. So maximising their box office for a single performance by having two sets of audiences for one show, if you will. It's a variation on, I suppose, satellite performances that were starting to emerge pre-COVID. And then there's organisations like Melbourne Digital Concert Hall who are working on touring infrastructure only. So not touring a show, but actually making their infrastructure available for tour. So a venue can work with the digital concert hall to bring in all the gear and crew required to live stream and work from their venue. Another big issue in Australia was reintroducing paid performances in the digital space. For a while, the majority of live streamed performances were provided free of charge, particularly for artists who are streaming their own work. Audiences would be asked to provide a contribution or a donation rather than buying a ticket. And I do think that the technology and platforms have caught up to provide us with plenty of options to monetize live digital performance. But it really was a turning point for the sector here to say, what we do has value, and now we would like you to treat this performance like any other show and buy a ticket. There's also a lot of work in that space currently being done to upskill arts workers on delivering digital performance more broadly, because it is a significant capability gap, which is one of the key influences on why more organisations have not been able to engage in the space. And finally, I'd like to talk quickly about the Melbourne Digital Concert Hall. They really are one of the best examples of digital delivery we saw during COVID. And now they're actually one of the leaders in extending this digital experience in this post-COVID world. The Digital Concert Hall not only moved quickly, but they did it really well. Within 2 weeks of our national lockdown, they launched their digital space. They've presented, I think it's 233 live concerts at last count, generating over $1 million in income for musicians and art sector workers who lost everything during COVID. And their model is really quite straightforward. You purchase a ticket to enjoy a high quality live streamed concert. They pass on the full ticket price to the artists, and there's a modest booking fee to keep the cameras rolling. In many cases, they also offer a small number of tickets to join the performance in person as part of a studio audience. To date, it's probably been mostly presenting fine or orchestral music, and originally to support Victorian artists, because we've really been governed by state border lockdowns. So originally it was about Victorian artists, but it has quickly grown to showcase great performers from around the country. It's now become a full-time job for its creators, and they have formalised as a company. And this year they're enabling performances from around the country with an increasing list of art forms. And like I said before, you need to be very specific about the requirements of each art form to decide how you can broadcast it. But the Digital Concert Hall has gone from live streaming closed performances to essentially pioneering an entirely new model of presenting. It might be from their studio space, or it might be that they send crew and gear to another venue so they can broadcast their local artists. It might be to a targeted local audience, or by putting it up on the Digital Concert Hall platform, and suddenly those local artists can promote their work to any audience member across the world with an internet connection. I'll wrap up, but I think it really is an incredibly exciting time for live performance. The Digital Concert Hall and everyone who engages in live streaming of performances or digital work are removing the real and the perceptual barriers to accessing live performance. They're developing new audiences. They're expanding the tastes of their existing audiences, which is really important, which means more tickets to more shows, which is good for all of us. So to wrap up my time, I guess I just wanted to reiterate that in Australia, for those engaging with digital performance, it has shifted consumer behaviour and the inclination for people to attend live performance. Rather than putting live performance in a competitive space with Netflix or compromising attendance at live performance, it's actually increased in-person participation. There's a great document developed by an Australian woman called Kate Larson called Our Hybrid Future, which I also recommend. It not only talks about how digital performance can and should be embraced moving forward, there's also a lot of information in there about the digital transformation of our organisations as a whole, so not just revolving around digital performance. And finally, my organisation is delivering our own industry event, both in person and online, in December this year, where discussions like digital performance are definitely on the agenda, along with 2 days of showcases of Australian work that is available for touring. Because we are also online this year, I would welcome you all to attend that as well. So thank you. I look forward to hearing from the other panelists and participating in a discussion later in the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for a very wide-ranging and inspiring look at what is possible and what has been made possible in Australia. And I thought also that the contrast between the findings from the different survey questions that you asked provided a very complimentary view to the AAPPAC survey, which gave a more live performance type look at what has happened in the past year. For the survey and the examples that you gave, it was quite forward-looking in a sense, because the centers seem to be learning from the experiences that they're going through and already trying to apply that into what could be possible in the future. So thank you. And moving from this big picture macro view, we are going to now hear from our second speaker, Ling Ting-Jun, and she is the Director of Programming and International Development at the National Theatre and Concert Hall in Taipei. As you noted from Rochelle's survey report, Taipei was one of the very few places in Asia where the performing arts centers remained open for a very long time until just a couple of weeks ago. Those of you who are not familiar with the National Theatre and Concert Hall in Taipei, it's one of the three big theaters under the National Performing Arts Group, the other two being in Taichung and most recently opened Wing Center in Kaohsiung. Ting-Jun also spearheads the NTCH's 5G Smart Theatre project, so I'm quite excited to hear about that. And it's part of the venue's digital transformation, and it looks at both hardware implementation and digital content production. Ting-Jun comes from a programming background and has spent quite a big part of her career bringing many international acts into Taiwan. So over to you, Ting-Jun.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here. Can I move to the next slide? So today I would like to share our project, the Future Theater Project. NTCH is about 34 years ago, and back then it's not a very old theater, but then it's a theater when it was built, not much digital planning was actually in place. So we've been going through digital transformation for about 3 years now, and this Future Theater Project was launched about mid last year. Along with the pandemic, but it also was part of our digital transformation. And this project focuses three areas: infrastructure, production, and audience experience. Next, please. So for the infrastructure, we are building a 5G enterprise network in our theater. It's a 4-year-long project, and then this year is the first. We will start with our national theater and the experimental theater. So an enterprise network is really a kind of network that's it's private within the organization, and it's going to be used for the equipment being transmitted for visual transmissions. And so we will install several 5G-enabled 4K cameras in various locations at the National Theater and the experimental theater, which is our black box. Where live and stage work can be live stream or recorded wirelessly in our theater. And obviously this work can be streamed to OTT media platforms. And another initiatives that will roll out this year is AR glasses. And these glasses can include inclusion service and multiple language subtitles. Whereas for now, our subtitles are projected on the side of theater. And so this will enable audience to have more choices. So this is the first two initiatives that we are trying for the 5G network this year. But next, please. But speaking of digital content, we, as mentioned earlier, that we are the very few theater that opened fully to full capacity last year, but a lot of our international programs were canceled, which is similar to a lot of organizations. But we also wanted to know how our audience is actually reacting to the digital content. So for our this year's TIFA, Taiwan International Festival of Arts, which just ended a few months ago, we try a few different things. So for the first one is Dimitri's Papayanu's video installation called Inside. So this work, it's a video installation that we put at the National Theater's theater lobby. And then this one, the concept of this work is really to treat the performance space as an exhibition space. and the video installation itself as the exhibit. And the audience can come in to enjoy this installation this is a 6-hour long installation, so they can come in and go, and then they can look at this installation as a landscape. And so in a very relaxed setting. So we put a lot of bean pillow in the lobby, and then there's even the bed. So this picture that you see in the presentation is actually the actual scene. It's a little small, but then people can really relax there. And then we put the lights in a very dark mode. So another experiment we did was in collaboration with International Theater Amsterdam. They were going to present in travel to Taiwan, but then travel was not possible for them. But their theater was, they were able to work inside of the theater. So we tried a live stream with them. And so we streamed Medea by Simon Stone. So the audience were actually sitting in the auditorium of our theater, and together the experience is a little bit like watching a movie together here in the auditorium, and where the content is being live streamed from Amsterdam. And after the performance, we have a live stream post-performance talk. The experience was interesting because for the audience, we have the content delivered to Taiwan, but then for the artists in Amsterdam, they had audience delivered to them. And so and then after the show, they could have a live interaction. And then another one we tried with was also with International Amsterdam Theater Amsterdam. It's a real-time and pre-recorded video footage by Ivo van Hoff, Kings of War. And this one was a home cinema base. So we open access to our audience through our ticketing system, and for a 24-hour access, and then audience can enjoy this content at their home. So these are the 3 different interactions that we tried with audience. Next, please. Thank you. And in terms of productions, we tried a small production last year connecting the virtual to real spaces as a production called Kaleidoscope. This production, we tried to use VR, multi-view camera, and 5G internet. And then the productions that took in 2 places, one in our Black Box Theater and one inside of our Performing Arts Library. The storyline is very, very simple. It was about a daughter wanted to tell things that she wanted to tell her mother before the mother passed away. And for the first half of the show, audience will experience the performance through VR headset, where in the headset, they will given context of the story. And then also it was taking place in the mother's sickbed. And they will then switch to a tablet, where the tablet were live transmitting from the theater. And then there are 5 different windows transmitting simultaneously. And then in the window, there are the characters, the daughter, the father, the mother, and her friends depicting their side of the stories. So audience can actually choose freely on the window and then decide which story they want to follow. And after this first half, audience are invited back to the theater for the first time, and then they will together experience a participatory ending inside of the theater. And then together they will get to see what the daughter wants to say to the mother. It's a very, very simple storytelling, but then we want to see how this creative technologies can expand the possibility of storytelling, and then how they can actually change the interaction with the audience in a live theater space. Next, please. So together in our digital content trying experiment, and then also the productions, What we see in the future, or what we are experiencing right now, is that we think that digital content should be tailored for online audiences. They should be tailored for people experiencing the content in front of the screen. So like Catherine just mentioned, it should be, the way the shots are taken and designed are different than, fixed cameras being in place. And then the second is we'll see more production with the use of creative technologies, such as motion capture, notch AR, VR, or online platforms for more interactions. And then they can be enhanced by 5G internet or without 5G internet. But we'll see, a more interdisciplinary talent working together in performing arts. And also we'll also see productions with minimum travel. This is obviously, because of our current situation. However, sustainability in live theater or in theater operations is being a very big topic in our theater. And we are wondering how the artwork can reflect this idea. So later this year, we'll introduce two works, one Fog Nation by Fujiyama Annette. And then this work, they are locally adopted, and then there will only be 4 people traveling. And Uncanny Valley by Rimini Protocol. This one has no one traveling at all. And the work is actually performed by a robot. Lastly, we'll also see more projects created for online environment and audience. These are the things that I think the ideas are actually generated for online experience, a little bit like post-internet age art, where the work is actually designed for audience who are maybe the younger generations who are actually online born, and then they are very, very used to online interactions. So maybe a physical space is a different meaning for them. So these are the things that we think will actually increase more and more in the future. And what I think is actually I'm actually quite excited about this, because I don't think live performance will be, I don't think they'll be replaced, but this means will actually expand the possibility for productions and creativities and aesthetic. So this is our finding. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ting-Jun. I thought that was really exciting because the view that the National Theatre and Concert Hall have taken is that the online audience is a unique entity for whom we need to customize and design using media that it is not necessarily needs to be strictly defined as live or online, but can be a blend and a mix, and includes also virtual reality and so on. Thank you so much for these wonderful possibilities that you have worked on. And moving on to our third speaker. Our third speaker is Charlotte Norris, and she's Managing Director of the Singapore Repertory Theatre, which was founded in 1993. It's one of Singapore's leading English language theatres and also one of the leading producers and presenters in Asia. They also have their own theatre, the Kawaran Chanrai Arts Centre. Charlotte is very well known in Singapore, and she's a seasoned arts administrator who's very passionate about building a diverse art scene that contributes to Singapore's standing as a culturally rich and vibrant country. And her focus at SRT is to ensure that it continues to produce and present outstanding theatre and learning programs and cater to patrons of all ages and walks of life. And so, Charlotte, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for including me in this absolutely inspiring and important conversation. I'm blown away with what we have seen from Taipei, so I can only wish we can catch up. But I'm talking about 3 different things that we did in the last year, working in the digital space. We are a live production house more than anything. So with 8 months of not being able to perform on our stage, we just had to get creative and allow ourselves to experiment. So I think that was one of the silver linings coming from this very challenging and character building period, that we were allowed to and had the space to do something completely different. So we basically threw 2 years of seasons out the window and started to become creative in smaller spaces. So we have our own 400-seat theater, which is absolutely gorgeous. I think it's worth mentioning in this context some of the things that we did in our venue to make it audience ready again. So we worked with a company that is from the aviation industry to do an antibacterial shield coating of every single surface on and off stage in our theater and offices to make sure that we did everything we could to safeguard our audiences and our artists. We removed physically we moved all or many of our seats and put in cafe tables and candles and, made it a nice experience because we're still operating to 25% capacity. Next slide, please. I wanted to talk about 3 productions that we did that all worked in different technologies and had certain learning outcomes and certain themes that we wanted to talk about. But I think there are 3 reasons why it was important for us not just to sit and wait for this to blow over. We wanted to make sure that we engage stakeholders. So it's very important for us to stay relevant in people's life, our audiences. We also have sponsors and donors obligation to live up to, that we were still doing work. We wanted to make sure that we could support our artists. We have no artist on our monthly pay slip. It's all our internal team, but 50% of people working in the arts in Singapore are freelancers. So it's very important for us to keep doing stuff so we can engage artists. And it was also very important for me to keep the team excited, employed, and mentally stable by being able to do things that were also interesting for them, because it has been rough for the teams as well. So 3 very important things that we did. So the first thing that we did when we were in our circuit breaker, which meant nobody could go anywhere, we were really confined to our homes, we engaged 9 playwrights, 9 directors, and 9 actors. And we created work over a period of 2 weeks. We wrote monologues, we recorded it, we performed it, and it was an immediate response to what was going on right there and right now. So it was very interesting to do small monologues, theater experiences where none of the participants had ever been in a room together. But it was a very, very interesting way of also having work that can live beyond. But what was important for us was, let's talk about the silver linings. Let's talk about what is also coming out of this period. So it wasn't just doom and gloom. So that was an interesting engagement strategy. Next slide, please. We had really good engagement with our audiences, really solid numbers in how we engaged. And I think what was interesting, that we then took this idea of silver linings and threw it into our audience base and said, so what's your silver lining? And we had about 50 artists from the age of 5 years and all the way up to different levels of professionalism, but we gave them a platform to be involved in the conversation. So I think that was very important as well as a piece of work. So we learned that we could actually do a lot of things via Zoom recording. So we bought cameras and various setups and sent out to our actors, and the actors were filming themselves, which was difficult, challenging, but I think the work that's still on our website was really good, and it was an immediate response during the circuit breaker. Next slide, please. We also produced a film. Now, Catherine mentioned, all of a sudden we're working in the space of competing with Netflix. Let's just be real, we can never compete with Netflix. But I think what was interesting about this project, which was a different technology, we really recorded a film. It's a 20-minute film. But the important thing that we wanted to do with this project was to show now is the time we really have to think out of the box in terms of partnership. So the 3 artistic directors that you're seeing here, some of you will know some of them, was really to show if frenemies can work together, everyone can and everyone should. So we really wanted to just talk about giving hope, talking about partnership in a different way, and having a little bit of fun with the industry. And again, we were able to hire filmmakers and directors. So again, just keeping the wheels going. Next slide, please. And what was important was never to raise funds, but that was honestly a little bit more like an afterthought. Hey, maybe we can actually use. It was always about producing work, telling our story, how difficult it was to produce when you couldn't produce, and what should we be doing in a fun way. But we also made it a fundraising campaign. And I think this was one of the key projects for the period. We are now, or were last weekend, live on stage in the International Festival of Arts in Singapore with a live continuation of this story. So again, we just wanted to show leadership, passion for what we do, even in difficult times, but also collaboration really does pay off. And when I felt low, because there are certainly days where I felt this was really difficult, I went into our donation page and just read all the messages from our audiences. And the donations range from $1 from the students who couldn't afford more but wanted to do something because they missed us, all the way up to more substantial donations. So it was just really heartwarming, and it was a wonderful way to stay engaged with our audiences. Next. We also, for a long time, we resisted the idea of looking into our past productions and our catalog of recordings. And did we want to do that? And we just looked at what they did in other places like the National Theatre of the UK. And we just didn't feel that the content we had the quality that we wanted to put into the market. It wasn't created for digital viewing, so we didn't want to go there. But the first show that we produced after the circuit breaker and after the closure, we were the first one back on stage, which was very important for us. So we also took a big financial gamble to start rehearsing, not quite knowing whether we would get the permission to go ahead. But we recorded it and did a professional recording of this. And then we put it live after. So we had a 6-week run in our theater at 25% capacity. But then we filmed it and put it into the market after the live run. Was it successful? I think in different ways. I think it was successful, also speaking to Catherine's point about accessibility for the less served audience base. Next slide, please. Because we really targeted predominantly, we maybe go back again, just talking about Tuesdays with More Digital. We target predominantly schools. No schools could or can still go to the theater. So we had really good engagement from the schools. We didn't quite know if they would buy a ticket, if they would pay for the content, but that was really good. And there were, of course, both new audiences, very few actually, but still there were people who let us know, we can't go to the theater for financial reasons or fiscal reasons or any other reasons we don't feel comfortable. So they're really grateful that they could see a production that was made with Singaporean audiences. We didn't have the rights for the international stream. Honestly, I'm not sure either whether an international audiences would have linked in to see or to dial in or pay a ticket to see a Singaporean version of a film they can see free on YouTube. So there are also different audiences that, it's relevant for different audiences. The last, my crystal ball slide, none of us really know. I think what has already been covered is digital content certainly has a certain degree of engagement in new audiences, and we have to keep that going. The business models, I don't think we can charge full ticket prices. what's the pain limit for how we pay for the productions? How much can we charge? So I think we're still working on that. I think, again, partnering with technology company, partnering maybe even with some of our friends in Taipei or other regions of Australia to look at, can we do something together in different ways so we cost share. We also have to develop our capacity. We are not, as a theatre company, we are not movie makers. We dabble with it, and I think we pulled it off, but there's a lot of capability development, and it's a long process. And I think my personal view is also, I think the content really has to be made for the viewing format. So I don't necessarily think all we should be doing is just filming or live streaming our on-stage productions, but really thinking about what kind of theatre experiences, storytelling can we do for a digital format, short format. It could be small chapters where the live experience or the finale has to be seen live, or some sort of mixed media in that way. So again, silver linings. It has been difficult, but it's also been super exciting to play with the format, think differently, talk to different people, and have more conversations about how we can move forward as an industry and as people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Very inspiring set of activities as well. And I also like that you touched on one area, which are the students that we haven't talked about so far, and a very important part of the audience, because some of the conversations around the pandemic and going digital in the past year was about whether we're losing one generation or one cohort who have not had the opportunity to experience the arts the way their seniors have done. So thank you so much to our three panelists. I feel that the crystal ball has given us so much to think about already, and so much work to do if we wanted to just keep up with our three panelist organizations. I'm sure, though, that there are still many questions in our minds, and I welcome you to either put them in the chat room or to unmute yourselves and just ask away the questions. I'll be very happy to direct them to the respective panel speakers. So let me give you a little bit of time to think about it while I ask a first kickoff question for the Q&A session. And we are going to touch on the topic of challenges, and in particular, one of the big challenges with regard to the digital initiatives that you've done is around resourcing. And we have not yet heard or gotten any hints around the costs that were involved and any other type of resourcing that you felt we needed to think about if we were to apply the lessons from the past year to the future, and also what it would mean for a long-running cost picture. So I think I would like to start first with Catherine, only because you've taken the longest break among the panelists so far. And if you could give us some insight into how your performing arts centers and groups in Australia think about the cost of delivering digital programs.
Yeah, sure. I think, look, like I mentioned before, those who have really embraced it so far are those who probably already had capacity internally or some skill internally prior to COVID in order to achieve it. I certainly know from our perspective, and I'll get to performing arts centres in a sec, but from our perspective, because we transferred our annual gathering to an online streamed experience, there's a whole bunch of costs there that we were just like, didn't even know that we needed to know that, or that was actually going to be a thing. For us, it was a completely Zoomed experience, but there was a lot of preparation required in terms of developing the content that you could then stream as a final product. Whereas the original vision had been, yes, it looks like we're going to have to go online, but we still plan to do that from a theatre, which again is an entirely different experience. A peer organisation of ours in New Zealand, the Performing Arts Network of New Zealand, streamed their equivalent event earlier this year with a full sort of studio setup, very slickly done. So I feel like the question about resources also depends on how content is evolving as well. We kind of went from how quickly can we pull the resources together and just get something out there to what is it artistically and technically that we actually want to achieve, what's the best kind of level that we can get to. So the from a resourcing point of view, it operates on a really, really large spectrum. From a performing arts centre point of view, certainly organisations like the Arts Centre Melbourne have some internal capacity which they've really embraced, and they redirected resources in order to achieve it. But from a regional performing arts centre point of view, because our venues are so broadly dispersed and quite often deeply regional, there's actually a skills shortage in the technical department in regional venues before COVID even happened, let alone now asking, okay, well, now you need to provide this whole other level of sort of technical resourcing and capability. So that's a much longer project, I suppose, for those organisations to develop the capability and build the will from those who fund those organisations that it's a worthwhile thing to do. So yeah, look, I think I don't have dollars and cents to put to what digital actually costs. I think it's very much an organisation by organisation thing, and it also depends on the format that you're talking about. So if it's a packaged performance, that might be an alternative that you implement because COVID has intervened and you can't do a performance live. That's a very different question to we are going to broadcast a performance as it is happening in front of a live audience as well. And to what scale do you want to do that?
Great, thank you so much. Just checking in on whether anyone has any questions before we direct the cost question to our other two panelists. Feel free to just unmute your mic and ask away.
Ping, it's Yvonne here from.
Hi, Yvonne.
So, yeah, I would love to hear the answers from the rest of the panel to your question, and also to direct a question to our colleague in NTCH. For some of these developments where you have worked with international theatre companies, as well as your own theatre companies in terms of employing various kinds of digital technology. What's your audience profile like? Because it does take a fairly open-minded audience, I guess, to want to be in that space, right? So I'm just curious, and feel free for the rest of the panelists too. Do you often see a very young and already converted, if you will, theatre audience, i.e., the folks who are turning up for some of these programs are already big fans, and they also tend to be of an age group, say, 25 to 40. Is that typical? I just want to, in a way, compare notes with you on this front. Thanks.
Thank you, Yvonne. So let me invite Ting Jun to take the question on audiences, and then after that, open it to the other two panelists as well before we return to the cost question. So Ting Jun?
Sure. So it really depends on the content that you're providing to the audience. For the digital content that we provided for our TIFA this year with the International Theatre Amsterdam, because those contents are, they are very well-known theatre productions, and then they are also very well known for our existing audience. So for that, we don't think we actually attract different audiences inside of the, to see the work. But one thing I thought was very interesting was that the home cinema program, which was Kings of War, Ivo Van Vogh's work, that one we actually saw like maybe about 7,000 of international audiences, like people from, I think a lot of people from China and then around the globe to join us in that program. So that one we thought was very interesting. And another thing we thought may draw younger audiences are works that are created online, like virtual space or virtual stage kind of work, because those are, works for people, the younger generation people who actually were born in the internet age. So with that one, I think we'll see a younger generation audience. But overall, I think because this is a very, very early stage of the work. So now the stage we're actually trying to building teams, cross-disciplinary teams, like building traditional theater artists, and then we're matching them with like engineers or creative technology companies. So we are at this early stage, we're seeing more of talents from different industry working together. So audience is a little later. Maybe I'll be able to have like a better idea, like by the end of the year, how the audience demographic will look like. But for now, this is what we see.
Thank you.
And could I just make a comment?
Yes, please.
I think that one of the interesting things in terms of production of material and of programs in a different way has come about because the traditional media that we use, and I think it's not just true for Australia, but it's true pretty much across the region. The traditional media that we've used to publicize our programs in the past, newspapers, free-to-air television, all of that sort of thing, that those media are really changing, and the media landscape is really disaggregating in all sorts of ways. So more and more, our marketing departments are thrown back on, particularly when they're looking at social media and social media marketing programs, are looking at generating our own content. And so that, in the past, we relied on those media outlets to do that for us. Less and less so that is the case. So, we're generating, podcasts or small, brief 2 to 3 minute sections or segments, or even shorter for our socials program. And the two things that come out of that, number one, I think in many respects, that really defines the kind of age of the audience and the potential of the audience. But in a way, that content almost becomes an opportunity, a program opportunity in itself. And I know that, with one of our festivals where we weren't able to put on the whole program because of COVID, because our theatres were shut down, we went back with those already contracted artists and said, okay, well, what would you do if you had a 2 or 3 minute opportunity with a major online and socials campaign that we would support? And interestingly enough, I have to say that both the international and national take-up on those artists for our Cabaret Festival last year in that format, very different format, online, but not just recorded performances or live performances, but a very different approach. Actually won us a whole raft of new audiences. Now, how we convert that, of course, is another question. But I do think for many of the larger organizations that are capable of it, the whole marketing approach these days, because of the breakdown of traditional media, does present us with a very strong opportunity.
Thank you, Douglas. I think that's really quite insightful because traditionally you would think that based on whatever is the program that you want to market, then you pick the type of marketing to go with it. But now with social media, what you use to market is also a driver and it's also a product in and of itself. I thought that one person who could respond with their experience to that and also to Yvonne's question would be Charlotte. So maybe Charlotte, can we hear from you on your thoughts with regard to audience and how we cater ourselves to this age group?
I mean, we don't have much solid data from what we did last year, to be very honest. I mean, I think the penetration of devices and physical ability to use online tools in Singapore is very high. So, but of course, we will see a shift in which are the audience groups that will take up these digital, but also who demands more digital. I mean, I have a 14-year-old son, and I can certainly see that what he is watching is short form. It's on his iPhone. It's a completely different way of consuming entertainment in a larger degree and in a different way of learning. So also our learning programs are now all online, which has been a challenge because we're used to being in the classroom and doing our camps physically, and now it's all on Zoom or different platforms. So it's really, again, it's really difficult to see what the future will be. We just have to keep experimenting and playing with those formats because the younger generation definitely request us to experiment in this space.
Thank you.
Sorry, home-based learning has its certain challenges. Sorry about the disruption.
I was a little bit curious about that. I thought you were actually in the theater and that was some art program going on in the background. While we wait for more questions to come in, we can revisit the cost question, and maybe Ting Chun, if you had some thoughts on costs of digital productions and how we should think about them as presenters.
Well, I have to admit the cost of the productions are rather high. The word I share, kaleidoscope, it costs us about 2 to 3 times the production cost than our similar scale traditional work. But a lot of it is because the technology that we are using is rather new. The internet, VR, and also the multi-cam. So they are all very, they are at the proof of process kind of idea. And then we are also trying that in our art form. So the whole process is very, very expensive. But then the way we look at it is actually to sort of consolidate different resources from different programs. So our approach is to actually maybe for some of our programs that got canceled, so we reallocate to the resources to this type of productions, and then externally we find allies in Taiwan, from the technology sectors or from other art centers who specialize in digital art. So it's more of what I see here in these productions, or like trying to roll out this digital productions, is that you really need to actually collaborate and then team up with different people and different organizations in order to really achieve the kind of quality that you're looking for. So in short, the cost is high, but then it's not really, we really like draw additional costs from our existing costs, but then that we sort of like consolidate different things. So that's for production. And then for the infrastructure, I have to mention, because it was a government-funded project, so we do have resources from our government for that, building the infrastructure.
Thank you.
Peng, I have a question, if I might, if that's
course.
okay. So the question really is, I'm interested, say, particularly in Singapore experience and Taiwan experience. Now that you've managed to open up theatres and now you're having to close them again. What mechanisms are you using to stay in touch and stay engaged with your audiences now again that they can't actually physically access your theatres? I'd be interested in what you're doing from a communications point of view using technology.
Great question. And so I will go in the sequence of countries that you listed. So let me invite Charlotte to talk about what she's seeing in Singapore.
Sure. I mean, we are actually allowed to open for now this week, but still at 25% capacity. So I think we have certainly, with key stakeholders, been keeping in touch much more regularly. Newsletters and video interviews and whatever we could to tell our stories and tell what's going on and what's our thinking. And that will continue. I think we've gotten a lot of good feedback on being in closer contact with our stakeholders. For the audiences, I mean, one of the things that we did, because a huge part of what we do is theatre for young audiences, and that has been, we haven't been back in full capacity in our theatre since November 19. So we've lost, I mean, we're really, really concerned about the young kids that we have spent 20 years on building traditions, and they haven't been with us for 2 years. So we created an online theatre festival. We created content directly to that. And I think it has to be said that the National Arts Council in Singapore supported with some smaller digital presentation grants to enable us and to encourage us to experiment. So will we bring that festival back, and how do we keep doing these digital content pieces that we have done over the last 18 months? Again, it comes down to budgets and also a little bit in terms of the skill development. Our core team are theatre makers, live theatre makers by heart and passion. And do we partner with technology companies? Do we partner with some of our other theatre friends and hire a couple of digital experts just to work for us? Or how do we do that, and how do we fund it? I mean, it's still many conversations and trying to figure it out, and at the same time hoping that we will be able to increase our capacity in our theatre and not go back to a lockdown, but to be able to increase also our earned income so we can fund some of these projects or find partners who understand the importance of the digital element of our work. So we're also trying to have new conversations with potential sponsors we have never had conversations with before, because now it's relevant for them to work with us. So, I mean, it's exciting, it's challenging in different ways, but something good will have to come out of it.
Thank you, Charlotte. And the second region Douglas listed was Taiwan. So Ting Chun, your thoughts on keeping in touch with audiences as you open and close due to the pandemic's restrictions?
Because we're a national theater, so our actually scope is a little, we focus not only just the audience, but then also, you know, how do we keep this entire industry alive, and how do we keep, you know, works continue to bloom. So these are also the things that that's really important to us. So for the two sides, one part with the artist community that we roll out a lot of support programs for maybe a reduction of the fees, or from our ticketing service or rental services. And also we roll out a lot of online workshop during this time to help artists with their digital front, more knowledge sharing, or some like people sharing their production experiences with the digital productions. So that's one front, like keeping the artistic community rolling. And then at the same time, we also we use social media and then create a lot of campaigns through the workshop that I mentioned, or also the mini productions that we film online, and then we wrote them out in our social media outlet. So that we hope that can cover a wider spectrum of both audience and the artist community.
Thank you. Huck Peng, if I might, I think that's really interesting. And I have to acknowledge our esteemed colleague, the chair of Mumbai National Centre for Performing Arts, India, Mr. Santook on the line. I wonder, given the circumstances in India, Mr. Santook, whether you would be eager to pick up, this question about how you're staying, in touch with patrons and so forth, of what you're doing in terms of communications and what is a very difficult situation we all appreciate in India at the moment. I'd understand if you wouldn't want to comment, but I think we would be interested in your views if you would be prepared to offer them.
Yes, certainly. Can everybody hear?
Yes.
Yes, good. Well, we see it as an opportunity to re-examine our management entire method in which we were operating in the past. We have 5 theaters and we had almost 6,000 performances in 5 genres. So we were very theater oriented, let's put it that way. And when everything is shut down and we are on a lockout, it's a very difficult situation for us. So the first thing we've done is to have organized ourselves to learn how to work effectively from home. We also have some musicians in residence. We have 18 teachers from the former Soviet areas who are resident teachers and the core of our symphony orchestra. And they have already in April, with permission from the government, recording a repertoire for the future digital broadcasts that we have planned. So what we've done is we've engaged very good, shall we say, experts in the area of market surveys. And I think a market survey for us, because we are going to depend a lot on international digital marketing. And we do have a product which is rather unique, and that is very good artists in the Indian repertoire, Indian music. And there we've got the people like Zakir Hussain and top people. And we think that there is a large population of this type of music which would like to hear them broadcasting from India. And we are setting up an OTT. We are setting up a digital division with international people advising us. Somebody from the London Symphony, there's somebody from the Italian opera scene. We've got, we've got good people advising us. If you know Ed Smith, people like that. And they are all coming in, and we are planning concerts, one after the other, by bringing in artists and recording them and keeping those records, even for future broadcasting in India, or even present broadcasting, by using the media that we are developing. And that is going to be international, but this whole thing will take us a few months because we are not confident as to when we can return to the stage. And therefore we have to prepare ourselves for a much wider audience, which is worldwide. And that is the basic idea. We also, unfortunately, we have a huge, shall we say, treasure house of old performances by people from Ravi Shankar to Yehudi Menuhin to people like that who've been playing at the NCPA for years and years. A few hundred, both audio and video tapes, which have to be properly edited, modernized, introduced, and then hopefully put on the net. We have the only professional symphony orchestra in India, which is doing quite well. And we had an excellent tour of Britain about 2 years ago. And we had planned a tour of Britain in 2022. Unfortunately, that's gone. So we've got to replace all the gaps with recording in the empty theaters, with state-of-the-art equipment and with proper directors and technicians. That's what we are looking at.
Thank you, Mr. Santuk. Sorry, sorry to intercede there.
No, that was fascinating. Thank you so much, Mr. Santuk. It's good to see you online. For those of you who are not familiar with Mr. Santuk, he is a legend, and he is also chairman of the National Center for Performing Arts in Mumbai. To find out more about him, you can read the last issue of the AAPPAC newsletter. We have an article 5 minutes with Mr. Santuk, which talks a lot about both the center and the symphony orchestra that he started. And with that, we have come to near the end of the session today. I think it has been quite insightful, and I hope that all of you will agree. There are some common themes that come through when we listen to our esteemed panelists. Catherine Connor, Executive Director of PACA, Lin Tingjun, Programming Director of the National Theatre and Concert Hall in Taipei, and Charlotte Norris, Managing Director of Singapore Repertory Theatre. I think the themes that came across, which I hope we can explore in the rest of the series, this is a suggestion to the AAPPAC Secretariat and to Douglas. Questions that we'd like to hear a bit more about, arising from some of the inspiration that we got today, include questions around what are the different possibilities for our audiences in the future. And in particular to Yvonne's question on the young among the audience, and what is it that we do for them specifically, and what is it we do for them inclusively. And the question of inclusivity was quite prominently raised by Catherine. I think digital really does solve for some of the social questions around access, which is a question that we should explore further. And then finally, something that came up in the responses from Tingjun and Charlotte around collaborations. I think it would be great to have more conversations around what collaboration means for digital, who and what types of digital companies do collaborations make a lot of sense. It's certainly an exciting time where we are intersecting with the digital media space, and the digital media space has really taken off in the past year with a lot of new innovations as well. And so that leaves for us many questions that we can discuss in our future episodes of this series. And so thank you very much. Please join me in a round of applause to our panel members to thank them very much for their time and their sharing today. And we hope that we can see you in the future sessions, which you will hear about right now, because I will hand you over to Douglas, who will talk about the rest of the series.
Thanks, Hak Peng, and I'd absolutely join you in expressing gratitude to our panelists. I thought really brought up some really pertinent issues. It's really good to hear and share experiences, and I thank you in particular for chairing and being Mr. Interlocutor in the session. Look, I do think it's a very important time for all of us, because whether it's working with our communities and thinking about how we help our communities get through this very difficult period, and then how we rebuild. I know I was looking at a very interesting piece or initiative in London recently, which was a collaboration between the creative industries sector and the London City Council, looking at rebuilding commerce and visitation, and involving the creative industries and creative arts in that as we come out of COVID. So there are very pertinent issues for us all in terms of what we can do in our communities, what we can do with artists, what we can do for our audiences, what we can do together as a network and an industry. And so there seems to me that there is no shortage of questions. There's no shortage of initiatives that are happening right across the network that we want to hear about, we want to understand, and hopefully we can, individually, we can pick up some lessons. But the sharing process, of course, is a communal one. So I agree with Hak Peng. If you have any particular topics that you would like to discuss or unpack or get us to explore further, when I say us, I mean primarily the hardworking secretariat, but honestly, the organisation belongs to us. So please, if you have any ideas or thoughts of issues that you would like to discuss further, please, please forward that to the secretariat. One of the things I think that has been very interesting, just looking at various views about the role of creative industries through COVID and hopefully out the other side, has been some work that UNESCO has been doing in terms of sustainability of creative industries through this time. You can go online and have a look at that. But we thought, in discussion with the Secretariat, that we might look to be a little more closely linked with UNESCO on this, and that there might be one or two speakers from that initiative, which has included people, of all sorts of great artists, as well as policy people, as well as people who run venues and run festivals, to get their views on the sustainability challenges and opportunities that we face. So, I think what we're looking there for, and there will be other organisations too that we will look to in terms of suggesting provocations to us, opening up ideas and thoughts that we can look at and, collectively and perhaps share and also learn. So our next session is coming up on Friday, 13th of August. We look forward to that. And also we've got our upcoming virtual conference from the 28th to 29th of October. Sadly, weren't able to bring us all together this year, but we keep our fingers crossed and say our prayers for having a real conference face-to-face, hopefully at the end of next year, which would be in Singapore. So once again, I thank you. I do encourage you to say what you want to hear about in these sessions. We're very happy to include speakers from our network, of course, but we're also happy to go outside and see where we can bring in people who would give us some objectivity and give us those provocations to think about the future. So thanks again. Thanks to the Secretariat. Thank you to the speakers and our moderator. And thank you for coming online. Please spread the word, and we look forward to seeing and hearing from you at the next one. So Rochelle, unless you want to say anything more, I think that would probably be it. Silence is golden. So I guess that's it. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Vote of thanks for Mr. Gautier.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. See you soon.
Thank you.